Welcome everybody to the summer quarterly meeting of the BC Vision Steering Committee. Great to see everybody, committee members. I know that a lot has happened since we last met, so I'm excited about these updates from both the action team and the advisory team in your packets. But I do want to start off first by letting committee members know your mics are not on. If you would wish to speak, press the little button in the front to speak, or if you want to keep it on all the time, which probably is not recommended, it's on the left-hand side. But just so you know, your mics are not on until you press that button or you turn it on the side. Okay. First of all, are there any questions about the content of the updates or anything in your packet that you want to mention at this time, committee? Seeing none. At the last steering committee, we heard from many of the action teams, and one common theme that was discussed was community engagement. So the advisory team has really been talking a lot about this particular topic, and we felt that it was a good timing to have further discussion about how BC Vision is an initiative that's defined in community engagement and what our goals are for the future. So you'll see that throughout tonight's or this afternoon's agenda. As you all know, it was in your packet and you received email notification that all of our vendor contracts have ended, including the community engagement contract with the United Way of Battle Creek and Kalamazoo region. The advisory team is currently reviewing all the contracts on a project basis. I lost my notes just a second. And we're reviewing those on a project basis, so excuse me. Then the United Way, what we want everybody to know that the United Way, and it's such a long word, United Way of Battle Creek and Kalamazoo region really did an excellent job putting a foundation in place in the initial process and has ensured that our next phase will be successful, and that it will fulfill the BC Vision guiding principles of engaging all community members. And we heard during that process that community members wanted authentic relationships, and we are going to have a more in-depth discussion about how we within BC Vision take part in this effort. So that's really a lot of the focus of today's committee meeting, because it's important that we get that right up front, that we've listened to the community as they've talked to us about what community engagement should be, and as we move forward, defining that and et cetera. So that's a big part of the discussion today. But I do want to introduce and take the time to introduce Kelly Bowles-Chapman. Sorry, Kelly. Yeah, you're behind that. I didn't see you. Kelly has graciously agreed to be the facilitator for this discussion to help us focus our discussion and deliver our objectives and our objectives. And those are an agreed upon a definition of community engagement, some high-level goals, and how we hope to measure our progress. Because if one thing that we hear all the time is that we can't be talking about and constantly planning as we want to get to that action step, and we really want to make sure that we get this right. We all agree about what community engagement means to the BC Vision process and how we're going to move forward. Then, after we go through that discussion, Scott Coverly will talk about transportation efforts, and then Karen Cooper-Boyer will discuss some of the work going on in the large business action team. We will make sure that we have a lot of time for questions at the end from the community before we close. And I know that our numbers are sparse. I don't want anybody to assume that that's because people aren't interested. You know, meetings in the summer, and I am going to say it's still summer, even though it feels a little fall-like. I know I got my summer digs on, and I was a little chilly this afternoon. But so I'm still fighting that it's still summer, and it's hard to get meetings in this time frame. People are ready to go back to school. They're getting in those last vacations and all of that kind of stuff. So please don't think that we have a lot of empty seats, that is any way that we have seen a decrease in the interest and the commitment to BC Vision, because not only action teams, not only the steering committee or the advisory team, we are seeing committed passion and action about BC Vision. So please don't think that these empty seats mean anything, but that people have busy schedules. So with that, unless the committee has any other questions? Nope. Okay, then I will turn it over to Kelly.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Sure.
So there's a wealth of experience, it looks like, up here. I know several of you in community engagement. You've got years of history in the community. But maybe if you can go back, this is really small type, and hopefully we could just we'll read it to you all as well in the audience, but and go and see if you all have consensus and agreement on the current definition that you have for BC Vision for community engagement. I think it's probably one that served you well to this point, as Rebecca alluded, and is this where you want to be as you go forward? So I think there's a sheet that just has this paragraph on it in your packet. This is one, I believe, that was brought forth by United Way, right, Chris? This is one that y'all prepared for them that served y'all to this point, right? It's in your packet.
I think so, but I'm trying to confirm it because I don't remember anything.
Okay.
But yes.
Well, I won't
would
ask you to
say
recite
yes.
it from memory, though. But it's here it is, if you can't find it in there. Community engagement is a process that includes multiple techniques to promote the participation of residents in a community life, especially those who are excluded and isolated, by engaging them in collective action to create a healthy community. It is a fluid and dynamic process with the power to impact multiple systems and to create lasting community change. Probably not one that you can just always remember. It's very defines a lot of things there, but it's a little bit of blank. So everybody found that. So I think what they asked today is if you all had consensus, if this serves you well, is this where you want to be right now? Does this define where BC Vision wants to be as you go forward to this next phase of community engagement? Could be like what I tell my kids, participation is not optional, right? So as you read it. Oops. It's in your packet too. So what do you think, Kathleen? Does this speak to you about what you think community engagement is for BC Vision?
It does. Actually, what I was really noticing is I like the multiple techniques, and I also like the fact that it talks about systems, because really we won't change, we won't have that be lasting change unless we impact systems. So, yeah, that part of it stood out to me.
Kyra, is this one that you could recite from memory too as you go through here on this? Anything here? Anything you'd want to change or define? Carissa, you're good with words too. Sue?
Can I ask a question? And so I'm not an expert, and so I'm really asking, So I'm really asking this question of the group. So, an intentional focus or lens of equity, does that show up in this? I'm reading the words, participation of residents, especially for those who are excluded and isolated. For me, I just feel like in everything that we create, from a definition of community engagement to our plans moving forward, I think we just need to double check and make sure that we're using an equity lens when we're creating things.
Does this meet that criteria for you as you look at that?
I don't know.
I'm wondering if we added the word historically, if that would change. Jorge, I guess I'm interested in what you would say, but if it said historically excluded and isolated.
Yes, some recognition that there are historical patterns of exclusion and marginalization, which is part of what's in our equity statement. But I also wonder if there's a way to lift up the importance of having those voices lead the process. So it's not a community engagement coming to those communities, but actually that those voices and experiences will lead the process.
That those voices, we're just making that about participation of all residents of the community life, especially those who are excluded and isolated, as far as leading the process? Is that how does that fit in there for you?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the wording is, but I'm just thinking about a way to embed in that one of the outcomes of the community engagement is that we actually are led by the experience and the voices of those communities that are historically marginalized.
And where this becomes really important is because the next part they're going to ask you to do, that they've asked me to ask you to do, is to set goals. And then, of course, measurement and how you would gauge that. So once you're satisfied with that this meets this next phase for you for community engagement, that's where the goals come in, which probably is harder. So, and you can probably always go back and tweak that, but through that process, but goals coming out of that. Lester?
Oh, so I was thinking, is there a way to Because sometimes this line here, it says, especially those who are excluded and isolated, sometimes that is taken kind of negatively in a way that certain people will be excluded. And I don't want to oversimplify it, but is there any way to just say all people in the community, not necessarily pointing out those who have been included or those who have not been included, but we are intending to reach everyone and include everyone on all levels in the process.
So that maybe you're flipping that to maybe more of a positive, and going instead from the negative piece. All people.
I actually have to disagree a little bit with that, because normally, in that all, this is one of the ways in which historically marginalized groups get obscured, if you will. Those experiences get obscured. So it's particularly from an equity perspective, if you don't actually name it and then have some statement about how those voices are going to impact the process, it can end up being a one-size-fit-all kind of approach. So from an equity perspective, normally you do want to highlight those groups that have not had access. So that would be my challenge to what you just offered.
So is there a way to say that in a more positive way? I see myself in that excluded portion, and I cringe when I see that. I want to be included. I appreciate it being named, but I want to feel a little more positive. I don't want the pity portion that typically comes with that. And maybe I shouldn't make it personal, but that's just...
One of the things that I do like about the all piece is in the small business action team, we really have been focusing on all, but our initiatives lean towards minority and women-owned businesses. So I guess I'm asking the group here, in all of your small action teams, is that the same as ours in regards to that we're looking at it through the equity lens, what we're doing? So I'm just trying to see if we said something about for all people, because that's one of the things that we heard in our small businesses is that they wanted it for more all people, not just that we were doing this for minority or women-owned businesses, that this is for a better community. Am I making sense?
Yeah, you are. So, well, with Workforce Development Action Team, we specifically focus with an equity lens with our strategic action plans. So services are available to all individuals, but the strategies that we're implementing are targeted with an equity lens focus. If that answers your question for workforce.
So maybe if we break it down by the sentence, because it's kind of a long sentence, y'all might agree there a bit. So let's start with this part and see if we're all in agreement. Community engagement is a process that includes multiple techniques to promote the participation of residents in a community life. And then we can wordsmith that again. So to that point, is everybody on the same page with that? That's kind of just defining the actual act of community engagement. Process that includes multiple techniques. I think y'all can agree to that, right? Probably everybody can name one of those. To promote the participation of residents in a community life. So that at the very basis is what community engagement is, right? Getting residents to participate. I think it was Lester, then you, Kara. You beat first on the buzzer. Those need buzzers, by the way, Angie. Then they could just go. Who's going to go first?
I'm seeing promote, but in my experience, I think it should include some programming, because to me it just needs to express more intentionality. It's something other than just, hey everybody, we need you. We need some more intention there.
More intentional than promote. Promote maybe is a little too soft of a word for you, is what Lester's suggesting.
Yeah. In regards to the participation of residents, one of the things that we've talked about on the steering committee is that a community it's not just the residents that are participating in this process. It is people who believe in Battle Creek that, we get calls on a daily basis of people that are living in California that grew up here that are really interested in this process and that want to help the process move forward. So I don't know if we just put residents on there, because we do want the help of other people besides just our residents to create a community that is what we want it to be. Because we do have people who don't live here, they're not residents here, but they spend a majority of their day here.
So you're saying perhaps that residence is a little too narrow, and that on some of the earlier original BC Vision documents I saw, they might have been drafts from some time ago, where people live, work, play, educate, worship, such. It was kind of a broader definition like that. This kind of funnels it down to residents. Is there a consensus? Should it reflect residents? Should it be others? Chris?
So Kelly, if I could, I found my reference.
Good.
So the definition that we were commonly working with takes a lot of that first part of that statement. It adds a fluid process, and it adds stakeholders in addition to residents to reinforce what I think Kara was suggesting, that it's more than residents. I think the other thing that's important to recognize, because I'd be guilty if I wordsmithed here, that generally speaking, that works. I think it's all the things that come with it too, that come with it in terms of Sue's point around focus on equity, that the strategies are influenced by some core values and principles. So our kind of one page on what is community engagement starts with that definition. That's the first half of that, but it talks about, core values and principles. It talks about ways to engage with community so it doesn't feel done to, but done with. And so I think there's some other things that could come with it that would highlight and reinforce what others have suggested.
So we're saying it's maybe a little too abbreviated here and didn't include the rest of that. It's kind of like the first paragraph of the definition. Is that kind of what it was? Or?
Right. It's almost like BC Vision, right? We've got a definition of it, but we've got principles and values and goals and objectives and strategies that come with it. Definition alone isn't enough.
There you go.
Here, definition alone probably isn't enough, and we could wordsmith it for a while and probably still would struggle. Maybe we go with a common general definition that works, and then we add in some values to it that could help address some of the thoughts that have been brought up. So
It is a challenge to come up with such a broad definition and an inclusive paragraph or definition that would reflect everything that you're going to do and that you want to do, I would suspect. Does that work for you, Angie? So given that, how would you also like to go forward? That talks about, because you're saying there's another part of this that inherently talks about core values, the part where you said done with, not done to. It's just this kind of the partner document or partner piece of this, maybe. Is that right?
I guess my question is there a way to take this kind of one pager that I have and maybe share it up some way to review that? Again, I think we'd all have, any one pager will all have a perspective about it. The question becomes, does it allow for us to build strategies and goals that can kind of address the big picture of what we're trying to get to? And how we're trying to engage with community in meaningful and open ways and not exclusive to one or two actions. That to me is what's most important.
So look at that. So with that piece, I suspect that what you're going to put up there, Chris, might really allow this group here to come up with just a few broad goals that you want to get to and then some ways that you're going to measure it. It's a big task at 3:30 on a Thursday afternoon in the summer to come up right off that with goals that you want to get to from the breadth of things that BC Vision does. But you can do it.
It's a suggestion that we adopt this definition and then go with some goals and objectives around it.
I think what BC Vision had asked that you all do, asked that I hopefully get you all to that point, is adopting and agreeing upon a definition and then coming up with the goals and and then they can build services and discuss those underneath that. So how you might want to tweak this, how you might want to add what Chris is just ready to put up here. So that's a much more deeper dive into community engagement and how you might proceed and progress with that. Maybe a way to go about this, because everybody will need some time to digest that a bit, would be some things. What do you want to see out of community engagement for BC Vision?
Okay, I can start.
Elizabeth,
So are we moving
yay.
on to the goals?
Well, I think we've got to figure out a way for everybody to maybe get that and digest that, and maybe that'll be the next meeting that y'all come back to. But maybe that'll help us reflect back on definition. We can see what you want out of community engagement for BC Vision.
I agree. I really agree with what Jorge said earlier too. It's very important to name certain communities for them to participate more. And what I'd like to see is for Burmese participation, and not just Burmese, but other people of color in marginalized communities as well. And that's what I want to see as a result of BC Vision being more inclusive. And sometimes that would, when we say inclusive, we might think we're inclusive, but sometimes inclusion can only happen if we go out of our comfort zone and our usual way about accomplishing engagement, community engagement. So I don't know how exactly to name it at this point, but what I really want to see is more Burmese participation as a result of us engaging communities who are different from us, engaging them in such a way that makes them comfortable, not us comfortable.
So that would be back to that goal, and that might help us get back to a definition piece as well. And then as you're doing that, and as we get some others written down, kind of think in your mind how you would want to reflect back for this group to measure that. Exactly. What else would everybody like to see out of? I know you have good ideas, and you'll think about it when you get out of here, go to the next piece. Vince, what do you think needs to come out of community engagement with BC Vision?
The only thing that really strikes me is that, we want to have authentic relationship. And I don't know how to quantify that. But qualitatively, I read the first definition and it feels really prescriptive to me, and it doesn't really feel like there's a relationship base there. It feels really kind of scientific almost. So, I really want to accent or focus on relationships. And I don't know if we're, in the wordsmithing that we're using, we're really getting to that point, okay? I think that we're kind of structural. All these things are important, process and equity and systems, but it doesn't sound like, it doesn't paint a vision of people having a relationship. So.
Coming down to an authentic relationship, people talking to people, making that relationship. Perfect. And then kind of kick around how you might want to measure that, how you would know if this group was making progress, or this initiative was making progress in that as well.
Well, I think that at some level, it's always participation. We can say it's a Thursday in August, in the summer, when it feels like fall, and we look at the room, there's not much participation. It's still disappointing. Okay, we can justify it, rationalize it anyway, but if we had this meeting today at the Burmese Center in Springfield, will we have a different outcome? Or if we had it at New Level Sports, or if we had it at some other places. We have to go to the communities, not just talk about the communities, to try and develop those kinds of relationships. So, I hate to sound really simple, but participation is huge. Whether it's in the committees, whether it's at steering committee meetings, whether it's at, I just think that we have to look at our participation. Who, where, when, what.
So I have a question. So when you're talking about participation, we name kind of BC Vision and participating in that process. Is the goal really participation in the process of BC Vision, or is it participation in Battle Creek and the community in general? Because we talk about community engagement with participation, residents in a community life. So
Well, I think that we have to start with BC Vision. That's why we're here today. It's part of the community life, but it's not the whole community life, and we can't measure the whole community. All we can measure is this initiative, okay? So, based on this initiative, is there more participation in Battle Creek and more people believing in Battle Creek? Well, hopefully. But if that wasn't the end product, but there was more participation in this initiative, we either change the initiative or we change the metric. A very wise guy of a nonprofit locally said, if our goals aren't, if the community isn't matching our goals, then we need to change the goals. But at least initially, we have to measure something. And again, I know what your point is, but are we the how do we measure if we are the catalyst for that community life? We have to start somewhere, okay? And the hope would be that if we have if our group is transformational and inspirational and in relationship with the community, that there will be additional benefits in the community because of that, empowering all community members, and then taking that belief in this initiative to different parts of the community. Does that make sense?
It does, but it makes me ask the question a little bit further then, and you know, other people might have other opinions around the participation piece, but my next question then is about participate in what way? Is it showing up at meetings? Is it showing up to the events around BC Vision? Is it, you know, like, how would you define participation?
You know, there's a famous quote, 90% of life is showing up. So, I mean, we got to start there, okay? I can't be in relationship at the Burmese community or at the Urban League without going over there and showing up. So I can't, or they don't come, you know what I mean? There has to be, you have to show up to have relationships. So I think it has to start with participation. Now, we can go deeper and change that definition, but I mean, at least in what I'm talking about in terms of participation, you can have impact without participation, but is that impact truly engagement?
So participation as it relates to community engagement. Exactly. Kathleen, did you have something?
Yeah, it feels like it's a both and. And I just want to name that this is a pretty intimidating setting. So for people that we want to be involved, is this someplace they're going to come spend their time? What I think about is the International Festival and how much bigger it was than last year and how much bigger it even was than what they planned for. So, you know, that's huge to me. And can we measure it? And can BC Vision take a little bit of credit for that being the case? I don't know, but it's certainly possible. So I just want to make sure that we think about the fact that our settings aren't exactly comfortable to a lot of community members, even if we show up in other locations, which I'm a strong advocate for.
Does everybody know what you're talking about? The International Festival that was at Bailey Park a week or so ago, right? Everybody knows what she's at. Who all went to that, by the way? Okay, it was great. It was huge. It was hot. We ran out of T-shirts, maybe. It was a great success. We thought on a variety of levels for that. So when you refer to that, going somewhere where folks want to be involved and where they want to come and participate.
Yeah, so when we talk about multiple techniques, I think about the fact that it's not just going to be around meetings. What can we do? Are there different ways that we can engage people, even in the BC Vision process, without it having to be a meeting?
And I still think that it's important to look at decision-making tables. Because if it's just engagement in festivals, that's one thing. You know, we're very comfortable doing celebrations. But really where it impacts people's lives the most is where decisions are made about allocating resources, creating programs, services. So I personally would actually like to see more of that rather than the other. The other will probably happen just because it's fun. But decision-making tables are really critical to the lives of people.
So maybe the next evolution, after you get everybody building relationships and comfortable in community group settings and meetings and festivals, then maybe they'll participate in the next phase.
Push back just a little bit on that, only because culture vitality is one of the 3 pillars that we have in BC Vision. And I think that the fact that we are seeing an increased number of people getting involved in things like events, festivals, I think that says a lot about a change of the narrative in the community. You know, we're not going to get out and be involved if we are going to continue to be, I don't like to use that word, but we've been self-loathers in Battle Creek. We've not lifted ourselves up. We've kind of put ourselves down. We've historically held on to baggage. So I want to remember that culture vitality is one of the 3 legs. And, you know, we talk about quality of life and placemaking. That makes a community. So while I do agree that the decision-making tables are important, I think if we look to measure engagement, we do have to look at all of those pillars.
And in addition to that, engagement can happen without relationship. So when we're looking at measuring things, when we're looking at planning events, you can go to New Level Sports. You can bring BC Vision Steering Committee to New Level Sports and still have this same setting with the same people, if the relationships are not there, you can have a very successful, and it was, I attended, very successful International Summer Fest without relationship. We just had a good marketing strategy. But what we're looking at here is how do we build authentic relationships that makes these experiences much more richer. So when we do have a steering committee meeting, the community is coming out because of the relationships. Or when we have International Summer Fest, people are not just coming out to enjoy the festivities or get the food or what have you. They're coming out and they're enjoying each other, the people in the community in which they live.
Back to your both and, perhaps. Many different methods of the strategy. What else might you want to see out of engagement?
When we do say both ends, though, there has to be a starting point. So who starts this? Who starts this initiation? And it has to be us who's sitting on this table. We want people to participate. So that means we have to go in there and participate in their circle, in their community first, in order for them to be comfortable being around our table, which is oftentimes extremely intimidating for certain groups of people. And I think as far as authentic relationship, I want to take this even one step further. Before having an authentic relationship with members of the community, I think it's important that we, people on this table, have that authentic relationship first.
Good point. Quiet on this side over here. Kyra, Carissa, Sue. Kyra, you're one of the people that I know that does community engagement better than anybody else out there. What would you like to see out of BC Vision? Whether it's a goal, an application, or something, from an engagement standpoint.
Well, a lot has already been said as far as what I was thinking, because I am one of the largest components of authentic relationships. And Elizabeth just stated a point where when we talk about authentic relationships, we can't say this is what we want and then not exhibit it ourselves. When we show up, we need to show up and be present, not just show up to say, oh, I went and I attended, but literally be present with everyone that's involved, with having conversations, getting to know them in so many different ways that's not very shallow or, yes, that's shallow. And so that authentic relationship piece is huge. And that comes more from just having a meeting as do it come from having a conversation. And oftentimes we have to be the one who would initiate the conversation because, as we've heard so many times, we can be, well, these settings are very intimidating, and so they're not just going to come up to you. So we have to be the ones to begin those creating those authentic relationships. And then they'll be more apt, people will be more apt to engage.
So you could even take that a step further. So changing how you might do that would be changing the format. Nobody's sitting in your front row here. Even Jim Scholl's sitting in the second row. He's usually a front row kind of guy too, but that engagement part even starting here. Mark, what about KCC in this? I know I did that just as you were putting that glass of water or that little bottle of water there.
That's cheating. You got to hold it. I think there's some good points here, and that is that we talked about building relationships, and again, authentic relationships to me are getting out and engaging. And I think it's sometimes hard with all of us in what we do to stop and do that. And I have done it with some of you at this table, but I have not done it with everyone. So I think, as I've listened to Vince and some of the things that have been said, I think that in order to do that, we've got to stop and reach out and do that. And so I was just making a note here that I need to spend some time in my schedule to make it a point to get out there and to build that relationship. So I feel as comfortable as I am right now calling the city manager's office and know that I've got that relationship. And if I could do that with everyone at this table, I would feel much better myself. So I think as a steering committee member, that's something I need to prioritize.
So, Vince, you got to push the
To
button.
Mark's point, that's
Or maybe
one of the
not.
things that we, oh, push my button? She got it. To Mark's point, that's one of the things we've talked about at the advisory committee, is that we need to get the steering committee together for either for a retreat or something where we can start building some of these relationships instead of having 12 lunches or, 15 breakfasts or whatever it takes for us individually to meet and start developing those relationships, to try and get together in a different setting than this, so that we can start developing what you talked about. So we were cognizant of that at our meetings, and that's one of the goals that I think we have. So.
And that helps you alter this point down here. That's the fifth one, actually. It says, determine how and when steering committee members will engage outside of steering committee meetings. But maybe it has to start also is what you're all saying, it seems, in steering committee meetings, so that you have that rapport and relationship with each other. And maybe, that always changes on various interpretations and levels, I'm sure. Sue, did you have something on that?
So I'm taking a step back from the leadership piece and thinking about the why we're even having this conversation. And I think about community engagement and why. Why are we doing this? So is it so folks will show up to festivals in our community because that, shows that our community is coming together and we're enjoying. But what are we hoping to come out of them attending the International Festival? I think about the word empowerment because, and that takes me to that place of inclusion and having the decisions that are made and the activities that we are thinking about when it comes to community engagement around the real wants and needs and aspirations of our community. And I'm going to be, this is an assumption, I'm going to be much more apt to engage in a process if I have my passion about this change or improvement that needs to happen in our community, and someone's listening and will let me lead this work. And it's that do for, but I think there's another do. I think there's letting our community lead this transformation, and I think we try as leaders, as organizations that work with families. I think we try to engage people and empower them to help make change and to help inform what we need to do. But I don't want to get away from that core component of why we're doing community engagement in the first place. And so I think that's outcomes. I think if we're looking for outcomes, and I'm not discounting the fact that a lot of people showing up to an event isn't a great outcome, because that's showing more people are engaged. But the real deep outcomes, what did that mean? What changed in our community because people showed up to the event? Those are the things we need to really set as our goals for our outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Deeper. Kathleen?
So I'm going back a little bit, back to what we were just saying, although it feeds together. And Sue was mentioning that, like in our case, early childhood and the relationships we develop there. So I do think it's important for us to have relationship here. And I want to remember that we are each in roles and departments and organizations where we're building authentic relationship with the people we work with there, and then our colleagues, and then together we're building relationship with the people that we work with in the community. So there's a lot of layers to this, and I think that's where we actually, I know I don't go to something in our department and think, oh, I really need to make sure I talk to more people and build authentic relationship. But in fact, that's what I need to be doing, because if somebody gets to know me a little bit better through our work together, whether they're a family or another colleague, when something like this comes up and I say, hey, there's this BC Vision event coming, I've got that relationship, so now I can invite them and it'll mean something. So we need to build more relationships, and I don't want to discount those relationships that we're already building on a regular basis, and then challenge myself and anyone else to be a little more intentional about that in what we're doing with the community.
Anybody else have any thoughts on Lester?
I just want to also highlight the difference between a personal relationship and a business relationship. In doing the landscape scan and talking to people in the community, when they speak about engagement being a relational, it's not a business relationship. It's a one-on-one personal relationship. So I think that we should take that in consideration when we're talking about building relationships, coming to receive a service and having a level of trust with the individual that you're receiving a service from, and that individual that is given the service, having a level of trust is different than having a true, genuine, and if I could use this term, community relationship with the individual. When the community spoke about relationships, that is what they were referring to.
By landscape scan, everyone's on the same page with that, knowing what that was and that work done. Okay. And you have shared results of that yet, or will?
The landscape scan was conducted last year.
Perfect. So everybody's got that they've seen.
At least the
using that
executive
work.
summary.
Okay, executive summary. That great. Good. So process on what you want to. Oh, go ahead. Here, Elizabeth, sorry.
I also want to add with what Sue and Rebecca were saying about having a relationship. It's also very important to consider an equity lens in building those authentic relationships. I'm going to share a quick example and a testimony for myself. Being from the Burmese community, it's been very hard for us to be in this table, and even when we're in this table, it's very hard for us to be included in conversations. Not because no one prevents us necessarily, but because our internalized oppression and our own experiences prevents us from speaking up, which was very hard. And today, me speaking here and voicing my opinion is definitely a result of our works. I think that as fellow community steering committee members, if I don't feel accepted and included here, how would I be able to trust you to go out into the community and change lives and impact people? If I don't feel that I'm welcomed and included in this group. And with an equity approach, it would be that if I'm here longer, if it seems that I have a more rooted relationship in this community, new participants, I somehow, how to say this, would, because of certain privileges, be able to share that opportunity with new participants. Most of you, I don't even know your name. So it's, I've been trying, but as people from marginalized community, we can only try so much. And I just want to bring that on the table as an example. Hopefully it'll help some of us understand the kind of engagement it would look like, because the engagement that we have in small tables is a reflection of engagement that we have in the big community.
Great point, Elizabeth. Thank you. Anybody have anything to add to that? Okay. What are the next steps then? So when you talk about other goals, so we focused a lot on relationships, focused a lot on authentic relationships within yourselves here, intentionality, you all have said that. Feels like a little bit of a trip down memory lane for several of the programs that a lot of you have been involved in, initiatives throughout the years. A lot of the same themes keep coming up, so maybe we'll learn the lessons from those, right? From Yes We Can, from others that have come up on, talking about looking outward, intentionality, to looking to build relationships. Maybe we'll move past that and use that information and all that knowledge that has been gained over the years to go to this next level of what y'all want to do. What else? Because Angie's not going to let you out of here without a few more goals, I think, on community engagement. Right. Communities of color, that's back to the definition piece, yes, but people talking to people, still that relationship theme coming through that, participation outside of meetings, participation in decision-making measure under all pillars, Engagement can happen without relationship, yes, and participation in other groups, in their groups. So again, back to other goals for community engagement. I think what BC Vision staff will do and probably bring back to you again, then is to take this information, retool some things on the definition, and then come back with goals and I'm sure development of services under community engagement. Magic wand, what else would you want to see out there in community engagement? It's not just like a pick it up at the store and say, yes, here, this application, but
Do you need them? Go. Oh, Carissa here. One of my questions I have is the participation outside of meetings piece. What does that look like? Could that be with media, utilizing media? What does that participation look like? Is it someone sharing our content? Is it individuals showing up to our meetings? So I just wanted to hear from the committee to see what participation looks like for us.
participation from, just to clarify, of this committee?
I'm sorry, from community members.
From community members.
Mm-hmm.
What's that look like?
I think it's all of what you said. I mean, I think it's participation in meetings, but as we've talked about, a lot of times that's not a comfortable place for some people to be. So it's, you know, I'm going to talk about transportation a little bit. So if it's transportation, are we engaging the the communities that are struggling with transportation? How are we getting people involved to have a voice or to help be a part of what a solution might be? Are we, so participation in that level. I think it's also, when we see, I think events are an important thing because there's a lot of conversations that happen at Summerfest. There's a lot of conversations that happen at Cruise the Gut, but there's also a lot of conversations that happen at commission meetings or school board meetings and et cetera that we can also take other places. I just go back to the fact that the challenge for all of us when we first started talking about BC Vision was figure out where you fit. Where does your organization fit, or where do your employees or the members of your community or et cetera, where do they fit in the pieces of BC Vision and what can you get behind? Because not everybody is going to be involved in everything of BC Vision. I take, for example, the city is not really involved in early childhood. However, there are a lot of things that we can do to help positively affect, early childhood learning, whether that's making sure we have transportation or whether that's making sure that we have walkable neighborhoods. It's making sure that, streets are plowed and sidewalks are cleared for kids to get to school and et cetera. I mean, there's little pieces that we all have to step up on. So I think participation varies, but that we're encouraging participations in all of the circles that all of us deal with. And I don't think it's going to be the same for any one organization or any one person, but that's just me.
What other things would you like to see? Oh, Ben, right there.
Yeah, well, following up on that, I think we need to talk about this group as well, what you asked before. So, I was a little embarrassed when I wasn't one of the members that raised their hands of who went to International Festival. And I think that's a great thing because there were so many hands raised across this table of who did attend. So, I think we could be strategic about festivals like that in terms of how we're participating as a steering committee. As leaders in the city. I would love to have individuals show up. I'll do a quick plug for our prep fairs and job fairs. If individuals came to those, and because it's more than just the individuals as well, it's our action team members, for them to see leaders show up from the steering committee and thank them for volunteering and assisting people. That's powerful, and it gets to that personal engagement as well. So I don't know if there's things that we could measure as a steering committee as well in terms of how we're participating in other events in the community.
How do you handle that now? Y'all are pretty involved in the community. You probably wouldn't be on this on the steering committee. How do you handle that now about how you go and engage and represent yourself as not only an individual but as part of BC Vision?
I don't think we do. It's informal.
I think that we could use some assistance too, is how best, it's going about not doing things at people, but with people. So how is the best way to engage a variety of our stakeholders or the variety of the people that live in this community, that live, work, and play in this community? What does that look like? If these types of settings are not helpful, or they're a little bit intimidating, what can we do to change that? What does that model look like? Recently, we've been working with the police department, and how do we work in different communities? Because it's very intimidating. It's intimidating to come to City Hall. I think it's a beautiful building, but a lot of people don't like to come to City Hall for a variety of reasons. So can we take City Hall on the road? So we're looking at options. looking at options like that to go to people so that it is less intimidating. But we need help. That's the but and. We need help understanding what is the most helpful to work in the Burmese community or in the Hispanic community or in the Latino community or in the African American community, whatever. We need assistance in there. So all we can do is listen and then figure out how best each one of us in our organizations can participate to get positive benefits. And that could just be a very small group of people, and that's okay.
I'm actually happy that you brought that up, and Ben, that you brought that up, because at the International Summerfest, we had a couple volunteers from the Workforce Development Group that came and worked the booth and talked to people about BC Vision and what was going on with the job fair and prep fair. That worked really well. So it's very timely. Tomorrow morning, you'll get an email from Devin, and we're looking for a couple of volunteers from the steering committee to be at the Charitable Union event on Tuesday. Remind me of the time. 3 to 7, and we'll divide up time, so whatever time you can serve during that, and just help us out at the BC Vision table talking to people, because the first thing we hear is, oh yeah, I got my eyeglasses from you the other week, and then we kind of go into what it actually is. So having some support from this table would be really good at that event.
And changing it up, I mean, y'all have strengths within, I bet you have the resources and strengths and knowledge within your own group to build an engaging type meeting so that a Jim Scholl and Matt Lynn are fighting to sit in the front seat, right here in the front row to be engaged, and others in the community they're standing room only. I bet you have the resources, the connections, the relationships to do that. So what's stopping you from calling on yourselves to do that, to change this up?
So a couple of things that I'd like to see built into, one is the long view. I think sometimes while it's important to have short-term and intermediate goals, so I'm not advocating against that, but I'm wanting us to think about, so how do we do this for the next 20 years so that we're constantly building and continuously improving, we're accelerating the things that are working, we're critically analyzing the things that aren't. So if populations of color or a particular group aren't feeling like they're engaged, then let's talk critically about that and say, well, we're doing something that's not working. How do we adjust? So that would be one. And the second thing is I think sometimes our default is a process default. So BC Vision is a community-wide, large-scale effort to change conditions in the community. While I think definitions are important and talking about the way in which or the process in which we would do that, I think sometimes while we might not find people fighting to get in the front row or people even showing up and being as engaged, it's partly because if I was out in the community, I'm not sure I'd understand right now what it is that we're trying to do and what my way that I could connect with that is. So I think we got to keep thinking bigger vision. And we got to keep thinking bigger goals and holding ourselves accountable. To that point, I know we're trying to get there, but we do a lot of talking about that versus saying, let's try these 3 goals on and let's see if they work. And when they work, let's accelerate them. When they don't work, let's adjust them and be critical about that so we can change quickly, because the community's waiting for us to lead. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is by being a little bit bolder and a little bit more on vision and goals. And process is important. I'm not trying to discount that, but not spending quite as much time as I see us spending on process.
How could you do that now? So on that same piece, I bet this is a chance for y'all to give, just to build that right now on something that you could do.
I think that building on what he said, Chris said, is, taking it out of the process element, but also realizing that, we're looking at our goal is changing conditions, and just thinking about, some of the language that is around the vision, mission for BC Vision, making Battle Creek a place where people can live, work, and play. We're talking about culture of vitality. We're talking about business. We're talking about education. The implication here is that we're trying to change the culture of our city, and that's huge. And that is work that cannot be manufactured. Relationships cannot be manufactured. And the conversation that we're having here at the table today is reflective of what needs to take place in the community. It's not something that you can do overnight. It's multiple layers. It's multiple of opinions merging together to become one. And just having, just realizing that it's going to take time and it's going to take conversation and getting to know people. And when relationships happen, they happen unbeknownst to the people in which they happen to. Most of the time, unless you're dating someone. But at any rate, you know, when you build relationships with people in the community, you just got to get to know them. People in the community have to get to know leaders in the community. We have to get to know each other on the steering committee. What are our value systems? What makes you tick? What doesn't make you tick? You know, and when those relationships and those conversations happen, we'll produce that culture in the city where people are living, they're working, they're playing, they're engaging. It will happen, but we have to give ourselves time, but also realize that this is a culture shift. This is more than a process to get people jobs, because you can get people jobs without engagement. We're saying continuously engagement, authentic relationship, not just relationship, but authentic relationship. This is culture, this is personal, and it takes time. And I think that a lot of the things that we have said today will get us to where we want to be. But I think we also have to realize it's going to take time, but it's going to take conversation too.
Push a button.
So I'd like to get specific. So between now and the next steering committee meeting, which is November 16th, why don't we do this? Why don't we pair up as steering committee members, partner with the Burma Center potentially, or you know, a couple of groups. Let's go out and do community conversations as pairs. We're building relationship as steering committee, or as threes, or whatever the right number is. Let's go out and have some community level conversations with the populations we're trying to engage deeper and more with, and build those authentic relationships. Let's do the next meeting at the Multicultural Center. Let's see if that works. Or let's see what parts of that might work. And then let's come back and say, here's what we learned in the last 3 months, or 2 months, I don't know my time, 3 months, that we tried this. And what worked that we want to continue, what didn't work that either didn't feel authentic or felt short-sighted or short-term, and then let's just build on that, and then let's replicate it. And let's say, okay, now we're building a community engagement strategy with the people of the community, and we're learning from that, and we're setting goals to say, let's do more of that, or let's do less of this and more of that. I mean, I think we got to get a little bit specific right now so that the strategy can build organically as much as it can build by us just sitting here right now trying to brainstorm a goal.
So what it feels like right here, when we came in, and you know, those of you sitting in kind of this type of process-focused environment, and to have to wordsmith, okay, how do you feel about residents? Is that a broad enough term? How do you feel about this term? Well, it feels like y'all are just getting to this next level now where you actually can have some conversations together and can have some things where you can actually move the mark a little bit. Not just about where to put the commas in the definition and thesaurus on that deal. I mean, that's what we could do. I mean, we could do that. But maybe now what can you do to really push yourselves? Sounds like you have some work to do amongst yourselves. And then you're getting a 2-for-1 kind of there, Chris, when you're going out together in pairs or twos or threes, and then you're building that relationship amongst yourselves and going into the community and talking and having conversations. Is that a yes, resonate? Is that a, I don't know what he's talking about? Is that a...
I think it's powerful. I think it would be transformational, and I'm excited, and I hope we do it.
Not because you're sitting next to him, but right, and you're sitting... Anybody? Kyra, push the button. What do you think? The buzzer's going off on it.
I just have one quick question actually for Chris. I actually really, really like that idea. And I'm wondering, when you say have conversations with different people in the community, what should those conversations be centered around? Are we specifically talking about something relative to BC Vision, or are we just, what should those conversations be?
Well, again, I think we have the assets from the years of experience doing some community engagement. I'd make them aspirational kitchen table conversations where we invite in people that would be willing, 8 or so, to say, so what's your aspiration for the community, and maybe even talk a little bit about BC Vision in that. And let's take that feedback. We have a fair amount of feedback, so I don't want to replicate that, but I also hear from many around this table that we might not have all the feedback that might be helpful in terms of informing strategies moving forward. or at least we're engaging people and they feel like we're being intentional about that. Maybe they don't feel that we've been intentional enough about that. So that would just be my idea, but I almost think to the next step point, as opposed to just saying it's our job, let's identify the 3, 4, 5 of us who are willing to sit on this, kind of action team, develop the strategy, work with others who want to engage with community, and then let's build that out, and then let's create the invitation for everybody. Let's not try to develop it as one big group, but after today, everybody will go, well, I don't know what that meant.
What's up?
I want to echo support for that idea. I love it. And we're sitting here trying to define community engagement. Let's ask what community engagement means to others.
Let's look at their thesaurus, right? Exactly. Kara, you haven't seen anything lately? I know you're writing it down, you're taking it in. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think, one of the things that I would say as being a co-chair of an action team, I have a partner that, when we talk about partnering up with,
I didn't even make you do it, I'm sorry.
We have partners that we're co-chairing with that can definitely help with the steering committee as, another person from the steering committee, but also utilizing our co-chairs with the action teams to go out and do those conversations. And I agree, asking what are the aspirations for the community and what does community engagement mean for that? I think those are all solid questions.
Jorge, haven't heard from you in a bit. You got to keep up. I mean, you guys are on the either side of him, so keep it up.
It all sounds good. I mean, I just also feel that, I don't know. It feels like some of this was already happening. So I'm a little, kind of, just turned around when that was already beginning to happen through some efforts that we put together, and now we're, so I'm a little confused about kind of how we ended up here. So I'm processing. That's why I haven't said anything.
Sue, what are you thinking?
So I think Jorge's on point. So, and I'm not discounting the idea. I'm just wondering, so is it our learning that's going to occur by us being engaged in this process at this time to build upon what's already been learned through the actual community engagement process for BC Vision? I'm sitting here thinking, because I am a planner, who am I going to bring together and who am I going to work with and how could this be valuable? And so I just want to make sure we truly are building upon the work that's already been done, and we're not putting ourselves in a place of we're doing this to learn. I guess I need to know what the outcome of this is, because that will help me plan who I need to talk to, because we've talked to a lot of people. I mean, in the beginning of this process, we engaged a lot of our families that we work with that would be my go-to folks that I'd want to engage. So I guess I just need to know more and know what exactly the outcome is.
Let me see if this resonates. If I'm this is what it feels like listening to all of you, and you tell me if this is accurate or not. And coming here, trying to be the wordsmiths on seeing if this was the right definition, felt like everybody kind of wasn't ready for something that kind of sterile a little bit to go into that and pull out your thesaurus and what words do you agree on. And it seems like there's different levels of self-reflection of how immersed you are in community engagement and how you feel others are here. So maybe some need to go out and feel like they need to go have those conversations. Some feel like they're already doing that work within their own action team. Is that so? How?
I would say yes, and there's always value in my mind for continued community engagement. So I'm not saying, oh, I already did this, I'm not doing it. But I just want to make sure what the outcome is. And if the outcome is for us to really, as a group, find out what our community believes community engagement should be, then that's something a little different than what we did in the past.
So if an outcome is to have a consensus of agreement on what a definition for community engagement for BC Vision would be, and for what the goals can be wrapped around that, and then how you would measure those goals, sounds like there's different degrees of maybe thinking that all the answers aren't right here for that definition. Is that right?
I think we have a different understanding on the level of community engagement that's taking place. Because we have yet to engage our community. So it's value in doing this. I mean, yes, we need to hear what the community feels that community engagement is, but we still yet need to engage our community on a large scale. And that's why I was personally excited when Chris suggested going out into the community and having conversation, because we have yet to scratch the surface.
Started. So one of the things that I'm thinking about is we're talking about changing conditions in the community. And if we, and I think, unfortunately, this feels to me like it's been part of the approach that we've operated under up until recently, with some efforts with community engagement that happened. It has been a very utilitarian approach. So here comes BC Vision. I want you to understand who we are, and I want you to feel excited about what we're doing. It's serving BC Vision. It's not serving the community necessarily, although it's supposed to be a community vision, right? So I feel that, in order to change conditions in the community, that it's not simply something that happens, for 5 years and then we give it up, right? I mean, we have to build a foundation that's going to be sustained over the lifetime of the community, hopefully. Then if that's the lens through which we're looking at what we're trying to do with community engagement, ultimately will serve the purposes of BC Vision, but it will be long-lasting beyond BC Vision. Because if we simply approach the community by saying, BC Vision, I want you to buy into it, then, it's very short-lived. They know it's got a shelf lifetime, and then it'll disappear or go away. So if we're saying we want to change the way we relate in this community, that's a different approach. And I think, to me, that feels like it's the most authentic, long-lasting approach that, again, will ultimately serve BC Vision and its maybe, very discrete goals.
So at the core, that definition would be changing how you approach, how you apply, how you live, how this is community engagement?
So I think so expanding on what he's saying, in order for this to be something that is a longitudinal change in how we work and play and live in this community, is that so organizations are understanding what families needs, and their policies and processes shift because of what we learn. I mean, how we really do this, it's BC Vision, we're learning all these things, we need to engage all these people, but we're engaging them in wanting a better Battle Creek. And then how to do that in a long term is we need to have policies that match the needs of the families in Battle Creek across organizations in our community. I mean, I think we need to look at this from a systems level, because the only way change is really going to stay is if it's embedded in all of our work, in all of our organizations and our businesses across the community.
I think that's actually why the last sentence here is so powerful, is that it's fluid and dynamic, and it impacts multiple systems to create. I mean, we have that piece of it right here, and that's exactly what we're talking about, is so that when these people aren't sitting at the table anymore, this doesn't go away.
Talk about the last sentence of the one that we covered up there, of the community engagement definition that y'all working on.
And I thought I heard what Chris said is, let's start by having conversations in a wide variety of our community. Whether it's in pairs or 3, it doesn't matter. But we start by having those, a much more intimate level conversation and be good listeners. It's not that we are out there to rally people around BC Vision. It's out there to better understand what we need to do to create a better community. So that, it may be that we ask specific questions or we listen about what does community engagement mean to you, and we gather that all of that information to guide the work as we go forward. But I think what I heard, and I think what Ellie was excited about, is let's have those conversations. We all know that there are going to be difficult things that we talk about. There's going to be difficult questions that were asked, and we might not be able to answer all of them, but we're making ourselves available to be able to listen and to take those back and get answers if we can't answer it then. I think what I heard, Chris, is what you said, is let's start by having dialogues in the community. And I know that work has been done, but we need to further that because, we're hearing some concerns that we haven't engaged, we haven't really gotten into community engagement to the level that's expected.
The one point I want to make is, going back to Elizabeth's conversation earlier, one of the things that we're trying to establish with these community conversations is trust. And I get the feeling, first of all, that before we go out in the community, we have to make sure that we trust each other. And I don't know if we're there yet, okay? Because I don't know if we're really in community together, and I think that we have to establish that first. And then secondly, one of the reasons that we've tried to change our model as it relates to engagement is because it started feeling top down. And the whole initiative, initially, that sounds great. The camera will love that one. But we wanted this to be a bottom up, okay, raising up of everybody, and particularly all peoples, historically or otherwise, to be empowered to change the community. And it started feeling top down. Okay, so I think that the real thought process is how do we get closer, how do we get authentic, and how do we get back to our roots of how this initially started all those 2, 3, 4 years ago that we've all vested our life. And I think that those parameters are kind of where I'm at, and everybody on this table is in a different place. I think Susan with Great Start Collaborative is very close to the work and feels it's very bottom up because she's working with those families. I think some of us interact differently with the community, and that's why it's a different answer for everybody. So, but I think that the difference as we go forward, and one of the conversations we had at one of the advisory committees is we wanted to review the different initiatives and how they, over the years, and what worked and what didn't work. Okay, and what can we do to be different from some of those other initiatives? And I haven't read some of those things
It's not done yet, right?
We've had some other things going on, but one thing that I do know in this community, and only being here for 7 years, is it all begins and ends with trust. And we have to do things differently to maintain it, to honor it, and develop it, and that has to be my North Star. So.
I think the piece that you're alluding to about studying the other initiatives over the years is something that'll be done. So you'll probably, whenever, I'm sure as soon as she gets it, however you all disseminate information, then you'll get that. I think that'll be a fascinating piece, really, to go back. I think we're out of time, and I think what probably your next step will be, you have an advisory committee to the steering committee, right? That would come back and take some structure to this and process. Is that how you're doing that?
Right,
yeah, I'm not familiar
But
with how your process
I
on
wouldn't
that.
make it exclusive to that, because some of the folks here that I think would be interested in helping develop the strategy aren't necessarily on the advisory committee, so no, let's not make it exclusive to that. Let's create the open invitation for anybody here to help develop that, because we're talking about building culture and norm. That doesn't happen in 1 to 2 years, although there's good things that'll happen in 1 to 2 years. And yes, to the point, I'm suggesting that we build on what's been done. And keep doing it over and over and over again, and keep us getting firsthand perspective of that, and action teams getting firsthand perspective of that, so it builds that culture and norm in.
You're going back to that fluid piece, fluid and dynamic process. Perhaps that's one of the most important things you can bring in that last sentence, right? So, I don't know how your process, Angie, is to go back to expand that. The suggestion is to expand beyond the advisory committee of those who have an interest.
Yep. So I guess I would ask for volunteers right now for who would like to participate in structuring some of what this looks like. Yes.
Elizabeth, you should do that. Yes, Jenny, raise your
Okay,
hand
so
for
we
that as
have
well.
Mark, Elizabeth,
Let's do it by first
Lester.
row.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see. It was behind your head, Kara. Chris, Jorge,
You guys are under, there's no one on that side.
Rebecca, Vince, Kathleen. Yep, I got Kara.
Yeah, maybe I'll just have another steering committee meeting, that's what it looks like.
It might as well be, I mean, maybe we should take a vote and see if the entire steering committee wants to be involved with this work.
Okay.
Since majority of our hands were up.
So everyone here.
Can we be invited and then
Yes.
let you know?
Yep. Okay.
Okay. So I think she said that you get to have a break, and then you get to go change gears quickly, no pun intended, to the transportation study that Scott's going to give you. You're going to get to digest that next. So, all right, you guys. Take a break.
All right, I said in my opening remarks that there has been a lot of great work happening. We've got wonderful people as part of action teams and volunteers, and we get to hear about one of those now. So it's my pleasure to introduce Scott Cubberly, and he's going to talk about the transportation study and the dialogue around transportation. Scott?
Thank you. Thank you for, hopefully that's, you guys can hear that. Thank you for allowing me to present this information. This has kind of taken and consumed the first half of this year of my life and working with a lot of people in this. And so I'm sure everybody has read through all 47 slides and the entire 17-page report. So we'll be able to move through this hopefully pretty quickly. But my thought would be that I'll kind of try and stop at some points to check in for questions, so you don't have to wait all the way at the end, but at the same time, I want to make sure that we don't get bogged down and we can get through everything that needs to get through. So, with that in mind, I just want to start out by thanking, and I'm not going to read through the list, you guys have the list, but this really was a community effort and took a lot of work with organizations in the community and a lot of work very closely with the community engagement team at the United Way to really get the word out on this and have some of these discussions that helped inform this work in the survey. And I also want to thank Battle Creek Transit specifically for being willing to have kind of meaningful and honest discussions about transportation barriers in the community. And they have a desire to be supportive and engaged partners moving forward and implementing recommendations that come out of this. So they have buy-in. Why are we talking about transportation? It's consistently come up within the work of the action teams and been listed as an issue and a barrier that people struggle with in our community. And so I think the thing that we need to really look at is, with that in mind, it really is kind of underpins the work that we're all doing and how transportation really impacts daily lives of the people that live here. And if we really want to have people have the ability to live, work, and play in Battle Creek, then we've got to give them the equitable access to be able to do that. So it's not just the same people showing up at events and things like that. We've got to be able to hear and listen and respond to them. So thinking of this, I want to share with you some information from the Transportation Equity Caucus that says that transportation is a crucial link to ensuring opportunity for all, connecting us to jobs, schools, housing, healthcare, grocery stores. But millions of poor people and people of color in communities where quality transportation options are unaffordable, unreliable, and are often non-existent. So keep that in mind and really think about how that kind of can influence this information and influence our work moving forward. There was a lot of community engagement that occurred in this, and we had the opportunity to hear from lots of people in lots of different ways. We had 529 responses to the surveys. We collected data to help inform this information from 9 different organizations. Met with 10 different employers, presented to 8 different neighborhood planning councils, held community discussions or focus groups with 6 different locations. We had multiple survey location collection sites, and I was able to meet with 4 out of the 5 community leaders, and we really met with people one-on-one at opportunities at the prep fairs and at diaper drive, and at the Easter celebration out at Parkway Manor. So we had lots of opportunities to hear from people in that way. Thinking about the work really was focused in on 3 different buckets: community resource and basic needs, non-emergency medical, and workforce issues regarding transportation. So I've tried to kind of identify the pillars for you to make it very easy to see those connections on how those kind of fit in the work that we're doing. But really thinking about culture of vitality, that was being discussed earlier, and thinking about that fact that Binder Park Zoo came up in this discussion, that people wanted access to the zoo and don't have it, okay? Wanting to be able to meet and have work with people and go to events and things and participate in the community, but how transportation is a barrier for that to occur, okay? And then just those basic needs, I mean, in the way it's all interconnected. If I can't have access to childcare, how am I going to maintain my ability to stay at work? Even if I find transportation, which is it? Is it chicken before the egg? Which happens first? It's really got to fit together in one kind of seamless, integrated system. We kind of had some guiding questions through this, and this information and how we developed those guiding questions came from archive surveys from the Community Transportation Association of America, Public Policy Associates, and Western Michigan University kind of helped kind of frame the questions that were used in the survey and kind of help us look through those guiding questions. So as we look at the kind of the overview of the respondents to the survey, keep in mind that the universe for the survey in totality is 529 respondents, but each kind of question has its own unique universe, especially how it's cross-tabbed against others as well. So you may see throughout this that there are 300 responses to one question or 485 to another. That's based upon the universe that we're using and able to make sure that the data is quality data. So it will start to get smaller as we cross-tab some of the data, okay? I would ask you to think about, as we're going through this, through the filter of the 3 pillars, and also think about how this information impacts your own work in your own organizations. How does this information illuminate issues of equity? And how does this information impact the work of all of the action teams that are really leading on the front lines? So in looking at the responses and the demographics of the survey responses, of those that identified their race, we had the ability to really, we over-sampled the African American population, and that's very intentional. Our sampling of other underrepresented communities of color were fairly close to the ACS data. We did notice that we maybe were a little bit short in engaging our Asian population, so we made some additional attempts and had the opportunity to work with ESL classes at the Burma Center to really get some very intense focus groups and get lots of information and personal reflections from them to help illuminate this, even though a survey was going to be very difficult for them to kind of take in. But having a discussion with an interpreter there allowed us to really get some informed information. The other group that was oversampled was our female population. That also makes sense because of the way that we engage organizations in our communities and the way that those organizations and the populations that they serve, okay, tend to be female dominant in that regard. Our age breakdown, we had concentrated and tried to focus in on most of the data in looking at the working age population in more detail, and that's represented in the responses here on that slide. So I'm moving ahead just to catch you up, I'm on 11. Hopefully that helps, for those that are following along with the hard copy. So we used GIS mapping where we could, and we accomplished that through asking respondents the nearest cross streets where they live, in order to make sure that we didn't want to get that personal, but we wanted to see neighborhoods and clusters and where current transportation was touching. You can see by looking at this that in most regards, those are transit routes through Battle Creek Transit, and they're touching most of the neighborhoods, and they're touching the need of those neighborhoods that are the most needy. The problem comes in, it's really a service time window problem, okay? And meeting the multiple needs of a 24/7 workforce, and how those people that when they work even, again, if I work second shift, when am I gonna engage and go out to get the work done that I needed for doctor's appointments and go to the grocery store and things like that? How do I make those adjustments? I've got to be able to have that opportunity. So we were able to look at, so most of the geocoding that you'll see is whittled down to 299 respondents. And then of those, once we take out those that are younger than 18, it gets us down to 225 is the universe for most of the mapping. Access to a personal vehicle. That's how most people get around in Michigan and here in Battle Creek locally. You can look at this, and we'll be able to see it once we go to the next slide. But here in this slide, when we look at just those people that were responded and included, and we had the ability to geocode them, 34% of the African American or Black respondents reported having no access to a personal vehicle, and that's 9% higher than their white counterparts in our community. So that's a significant issue, and we need to think about some of those reasons why, and we'll highlight them in a couple other areas. When we look at that next, the total kind of demographics that responded to that question, we can see that there's a unique correlation. Going back to a study that was done by the Brookings Institute and University of California, Berkeley, they said that nationally, 20% of African American households, 14% of Latino households, and 13% of Asian households nationally live without a car. Now when we start to take and look at these questions now, here locally in our community, 37.8% of our African American population in our community live without a car, access to a personal vehicle. 57% of our Latino population live without access to a personal vehicle. So we can see that we have significant issues here in our community with that. The other piece that's highlighted is that there was a study done by the Center for Law and Social Policy titled Vehicle Asset Limits and License Suspension. And the next slide kind of goes into the reasons why people are not able to drive or have access to those personal vehicles. And it goes back to kind of the over-policing that occurs for those populations of color. It goes back to being, if you live in poverty, the struggles that you have with maintaining a car, just those essential costs, the fact that Michigan's a no-fault insurance state, the way that we operate insurance in this state with if you have any separation in your insurance and then you immediately go back into the pool and you pay at much higher rates for those first 6 months. So individuals in our community that are struggling on a daily basis, if you think about the Alice population that is right there teetering on the edge where one bill can throw the financial situation of a family into catastrophe, and then how they have to deal with those repercussions. It's significant. So this slide certainly shows and talks about those top 3 kind of reasons. And then when you look at, though, down to even though suspended license due to fines or fees or legal obligations is at the very bottom, now when you break it out and you look at our that by race, we can see that our African American population is experiencing those issues at a much higher rate, double or triple that of their Caucasian counterparts. That kind of, again, kind of reemphasizes that issue. So think of that. Again, we have it broken out by gender as well. And there's, again, slightly a greater issue, again, with males versus females in this. And it's going to become some of those same issues. If we were to then the universe got too small for this to be statistically relevant, but we can draw some correlations between race and gender when these, looking at this as well, that this is going to cause, and again, your males tend to be engaged with the law enforcement and the criminal justice system at much higher rates than females as well. So when we think about employment, the next piece is thinking about how transportation impacts one's ability to maintain or find employment. And so we have a third of our respondents, almost 28% of those that were geocoded, identified that they quit or lost a job due to transportation issues in our community. It becomes greater issues when we start breaking it down and looking at the types of transportation people use. And we're not going to get into that level, but it gets very, you can see that young people are more greater impacted. First jobs, right? How did you get to your first job? You know, maybe it's mom, maybe it's dad, maybe I'm riding a bike, whatever, those issues come into play. Also, younger people tended to ride the bus more than others as well. Your next slide shows you that city bus is most frequently used by individuals identifying as being African American or black, 25%, and those that identified as being multiple races utilized public transportation at 31%. So again, that also tends to be, and we know and we heard through some of these discussions and the comments that they said that while public transportation is there, the bus is there, the routes are longer. People are oftentimes having to ride the bus for 2 hours at a time in order to get from one spot to another. If they have to transfer, if they have to make another stop for childcare issues, things like that, it's very difficult to move around. So you can factor that in with first job. You're already nervous. You're struggling with to juggle all the other things that go on in our lives, and now add in having to transfer buses, ride for a much longer period of time, get up early, and still make sure that you meet all the things that we need to do as a family for our children. Next slide shows and talks about the rate of those, and this is more in totality. So we're looking at Caucasian white individuals reported that they had lost their job at 17.4% versus 52% for those of multiple races, 41.8% African Americans, or our Latino population at 40%, and our Asian population at 33%. So again, the challenges and when those individuals come in, if we think about our immigrant, our refugee populations in our community and the challenges that they face with accessing public transportation and accessing and working through some of the issues that they have related to transportation and how difficult that is. It makes sense. Next slide talks about the most frequent of those that identified as the transportation being an issue why they lost their job, the types of transportation that were utilized: city bus, family friends, taxi cabs. Those are all kind of those less reliable modes of transportation, impacted by lots of other things. Weather can be an impact. We heard stories of people going to taking ESL classes, and typically there's carpooling that occurs in many instances. Well, if the one person who's driving that vehicle is the only person that can drive, they're sick, they're having an issue, or there's some issue with their car, the rest of the people in that group, 3, 4, 5 individuals, they also don't show up. So it has a ripple effect. This slide kind of represents what we've already talked about. then a breakdown by all of your demographic data by the type of transportation they identified most often as using. We talk about having access to community resources and services. This slide really shows disparities in how, by race, individuals in our communities of color struggle to access more of the resources that are needed to be successful as families in our communities. And while there were several different responses, they were kind of broken up into things. So basic needs was go to the grocery store, public library, attend activities and events, entertainment with friends, food assistance, public benefits, banking and financial services. Medical, of course, is pretty straightforward. And then employment was employment services and training and taking your child to school or daycare. Huge impacts. The next slide also goes into a little bit more depth, showing that information. And then there's also a breakdown of, by the frequency of transportation that they utilize. So again, taxi cabs, that showed up a lot in the discussions with individuals in the community in our focus groups. There were stories of individuals who are spending upwards of $100 a week on taxi cab services in order to kind of take care of their basic needs. Go to the grocery store, go to doctor's appointments for their children, get their children to and from school using a taxi cab. Then, and I witnessed this at one of our focus group sites. So I'm at VOSIS. VOSIS was able to pull together 6-8 different women for me to talk to, and they arranged for those that did not have transportation for the taxi. They made the calls, made the connections to come and get them. Over half of the individuals were late by over a half an hour because of the way that the taxis operate within the community and taking advantage of our non-English speaking members of our community. Taking circuitous routes to pad the rates, stories about having families ride together and them not splitting the cab fare amongst those families, charging each family those individual rates. So just taking advantage. And then especially when thinking about, imagine you don't speak the language or you don't speak it very well. You're there with your children and you're riding and you have this taxi driver who you don't know who happens to maybe be a man and you're a woman and you're completely riding this on your own and you are expecting, because you have traveled to Myers with your spouse or somebody else, so you kind of know the way there, and then they take off in a completely different direction. Wouldn't you start to panic and try and get nervous with your children in there? Where is this person going? Why are they going this way? That's a significant barrier, and to even want to use that, let alone be paid for it. So, significant issue. The volume of transportation-related challenges, just the sheer number, how they reported. So you have those people that are using the taxi had identified 6 to 8 challenges as being the biggest issue for them, and then bus being second. Non-emergency medical care access, percentages represent the proportion of the group defined by children, no children, and the mode of transportation that indicated one or more challenges related to medical care. For example, 72% of the respondents who live with children and rely on taxis reported challenges accessing medical services. That makes sense. Next slide allowed us to look at kind of what people are comfortable spending on a one-way trip to and from work, and also to access their community resources. And this kind of information went in to really help inform some of the recommendations, looking at cost and how we need to make sure we manage that in an effective way. But you can also see that you've got individuals that are willing to pay at a higher rate to get to work. And with those identifying as being someone of color as well, they're identifying that at a much higher rate they're willing to pay, and how they're being taken advantage of in that way. So we start looking at the mapping data, and the raw data before being disaggregated identified the four most difficult areas to get to in Greater Battle Creek as being Fort Custer at 41%, Fire Keepers at 39%, both large employment anchors in our community on exact opposite ends. Binder Park Zoo at 38%, and the Beckley Road Retail Corridor at 34%. The good news for Mark, of course, is that KCC was identified as the least difficult place to get to at only 9%. Okay. So they were able to, Western Michigan was able to geocode, and you can see how, so this map is an overlay of ACS poverty data with the Battle Creek transit routes and where people live. So again, most of the people have access to transit routes, but it's still that access time regarding to when it's available that becomes the main issue. This next chart, we asked people to identify what was the most difficult time for them to access transportation. Some people didn't even fill this out and said, duh, it's when the bus doesn't run. But in reality, I mean, it's more nuanced, and when we got people to start to make some of those and truly identify it, you can see that it's that off-shift time that's difficult. And when we think about maybe even interpreting this with some of the retail closures that have occurred in our community, the restaurants that have occurred, if we can't get people to access those things in the times that they need to be able to access it, it'd be interesting to see what their foot traffic is and when they saw the drop-offs at some of those stores. We can draw some conclusions there, I think. So we know that the Fort Custer area, after 6 o'clock p.m. and early morning is the most difficult time to have access. Fire keepers, again, we see that there's still an issue. Lots of people, and making sure, this may be a little difficult to completely draw the correlation, as some people may have confused access to fire keepers for entertainment purposes versus working. So there could be some differences there. But again, there's no way to access that, and we need to think about that, and that's a collaboration issue. While it's in Emmett Township, it's certainly not within our realm of, but we need to collaborate and make sure that if we're going to build something and have such a large economic development in our community, that we find a way to make sure that we support it. We also had, these are people that identified transportation to fire keepers, and it very closely resembles the same time frames as those for Fort Custer. Again, you can see on the next slide, those people that live at Binder Park Zoo, where Binder Park Zoo is located, and the fact that there's not even a bus route running there. Significant. Beckley Road Retail Corridor. That's a little bit difficult, but it's the straight horizontal line toward the southern part of the city, and you can see where the bus route runs across that, and it does not carry you completely through that retail corridor. So it's very difficult to have access to fresh vegetables, clothing, things like that people need. Not to mention that we also have out that way emergency medical care available through Bronson as well. So in summary, regarding the survey, the findings of the survey indicate that transportation is a barrier for some residents of Battle Creek. The responses highlight differences in transportation access by race, ethnicity, and location. The ethnic minority respondents reported transportation as a barrier to retaining employment. Respondents who experience challenges in accessing basic needs are more likely to use taxis, buses, or rely on family and friends. So the great thing is having that, we had that literal data, we had that there, but we also needed to capture some of the anecdotal data. We needed to hear firsthand from our families and people in our communities. And so some of the concerns that were raised, and this information was captured from those focus groups and discussions and from people responding to the online survey. Transportation access keeps parents from participating in school activities. We want to create a culture in our community that's college going, that's a vibrant culture in our community. We need to make sure that our parents have the support and our school districts have the support of parents, and it's easy for them to be engaged. The higher paying jobs in the community are located in Fort Custer Industrial Park, downtown, and Firekeepers Casino. Many of the jobs in these locations require that you are available to work off shifts when you first start your new job. A lack of bus service forces some women trying to lift themselves up to rely on high-priced taxi service and family and friends that can be unreliable in order to get to work. Accessing weekend events during the summer, Cereal Festival. It was great that we had to turn out at the International Festival, and people want to be engaged, but we got to find out ways to make sure that people that struggle but can still partake. That's when we have a fully inclusive community, when we think about those things. Many individuals that have a criminal background or have a prior history with addiction or come from generational poverty have issues with maintaining the legal ability to drive. It's impacted. There was a story of a man who's 35 years old now, who graduated from Battle Creek Central, went to Olivet College, graduated, has his degree, but never went ahead because of the change in the graduated driver's license law, never was able to go ahead and learn how to drive. So he started driving on his own without a license, and it immediately started to impact. He got pulled over, he got rung up, didn't do community time, didn't do any jail time, but was consistently, has 5-6 license suspensions, has all the accumulated fines and fees associated with it, is really never going to be able to dig out of that. So finding some ways that we can kind of augment our education community to be able to provide some of those services early on, through scholarships or something, to make it easier for people to be able to drive and remove some of those barriers. You know, again, you could be driving and you hope that your parents have kept the insurance up on the car, but you get pulled over, you're still the one driving the vehicle. Okay. Let's see. Other concerns. Youth would like to volunteer in the community, but transportation limits their opportunities. Many scholarships in the community ask for a customer service or a community service component to be included in the application. If you don't have the ability to get to those opportunities, or it takes you a long time to get there and you're very limited in how much time you can spend, you're kind of excluding yourself from that. And some people, it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy. They're not thinking of ways that they could. They just see that as an obstacle and just stop. Or even be able to participate in extracurricular activities that came through with some of the youth participants as well. First cars are most always older and often passed down from family members, and the cost for maintenance and upkeep is expensive. How can learning to drive become more affordable, user-friendly, and less difficult logistically? You know, if you don't have your own vehicle, or the vehicle you have has not been maintained properly, if you don't have a working turn signal, if you have a broken rear view mirror, you're not able to actually take your driver's training test. You have to pay them an additional fee to use their vehicle. And so again, that graduated, if you don't have children, that graduated driver's license process can cost you upwards of $500 to go through it. So very expensive and very. Also then thinking about if you're a non-English speaking individual and the struggles that occur with that as well. So you add, every time, they're not worried about whether or not you understand the directions or even understand, or the intimidation, and you can, the books and instruction isn't included in your language, or they're not going to take the time. So we need to find some ways to maybe partner with some of our local organizations to provide them some opportunities to provide ESL driver's training programming. Issues regarding the bus, again, I talked about the routes being very long, taking almost 2 hours, limited access for our Burmese families, which have a high concentration in Springfield. Our bus stops do not have schedules posted on them. So lots of barriers related to ESL. When we think about the research and the best practices that I was able to investigate, one thing I want you to keep in mind is that for every $1 invested in public transportation, it generates approximately $4 in economic return for a community. So, had the opportunity to discuss transportation in Flint and how they do that. It was a great discussion with their president of Flint Mass Transit Authority. Took into account information from the Region 8 Coordinated Mobility Plan, future cities presentations through the MEDC, ALICE reports, and other information from the Aspen Institute as well to kind of inform these recommendations. So getting in the short term, thinking about convening a meeting with the ownership management of City Cab to discuss issues identified in the survey and in focus groups. That has occurred to some degree, and I have not been successful. I've reached out to them, but have not been able to get a meeting or get them to return my calls even. So we'd like to do that, but whether we'll get the results, I don't know. Upgrade the technology capability of Battle Creek Transit through improved software tools that allows them to very quickly and look at routes and their route planning. It allows them to tell the story in a better way. There's software out there that allows them to look at American Community Survey data and the path that a route would take, how many jobs are along that route, how many people live along that route, and if they could just take move in by 2 or 3 blocks and make an adjustment, what does that look like to their travel time? What does it look like to costs? That's a no-brainer, to be able to be done. That should be, it's lower cost, but again, when we're talking about the city revenues and such, we've got to figure out some ways that we can partner and make things happen. Connect the B-cycle stations more closely with the neighborhoods to the downtown transit hub. So when the city bus comes in and it ends at 6 o'clock, if we had the B-cycle station right there at the transit hub, we could then have some targeted neighborhoods for other locations. We could allow individuals to be able to pick up a bike and travel another 30 minutes to an hour and get to their neighborhood and extend that situation. Specifically in the Burmese community, they also talked about how within their neighborhood having access to that would allow them to get to and from some of the apartment complexes very easily to the Burma Center for their ESL classes. And they're used to kind of traveling and using bikes in that manner. Looking at some funding opportunities for Women's Co-op through their Solutions Highway program to kind of pilot assisting people with fines, fees, and some of those barriers regarding their licenses. They also work with the street court program as well, and it's a natural synergy, I think, right there that would be a good fit. Looking at kind of mid-range opportunities, BC Rides existed in our community for a while. It was successful for a short period of time, and then started to kind of have some issues. And thinking of some ways that we can start out and phase this in a very meaningful and intentional way of ensuring that we partner with Battle Creek Transit, that we partner with our employers, and we work well and maybe target the employers that are participating in the Employer Resource Network out at the Fort, and start with them to leverage federal tax incentives that are available to employers that provide assistance with transportation. So the way Flint does this is they are transporting people from Flint to Brighton and Howell, Troy and Auburn Hills, and into Lansing to the tune of about 12,000 riders a month. And they are having those employers prepay for a monthly pass that's anywhere from $90 to $100 a month. They leverage those tax incentives to cover approximately half of that. And then through pre-tax withholding with those employees, $10 a week pre-tax is what that employee is having to pay for out of pocket. So $40 to get you to work back and forth is pretty good. And that solves the problem with cash flow issues that was occurring with BC Rides. Again, you start out that first job, you're struggling that first time, and you're making promises and payments and saying, yeah, I'll pay you 2 weeks from now. And this ensures that that entity receives the money that they need. Develop a community garage concept that allows individuals to learn basic car repair and provide low-cost options. From the city's perspective, it gives them an opportunity to get some vehicles off of blocks in yards and gets people the assistance that they need to just learning some of that basic maintenance. Lots of interest on that question on the survey about would you be interested in having learning how to do basic car repairs, and overwhelming responses, almost 60% of people. Provide the funding to increase access to driver education programs and ESL-friendly instruction, and then look from the long-term perspective with regards to the work that's being done with Battle Creek Transit on their 5-year strategic plan and the work that Calhoun County started to engage in on countywide transportation. A lot of these things could almost be the pilot that starts, especially when you look at the kind of this BC Rides 2.0 model, could be the pilot and really work well for rural transportation options in our community as well. And just thinking and making sure that we really are intentional about our economic development, community development, and having transportation be integrated into that process, and thinking about how it's going to impact people and how are people going to get there. It's really important. And if you think about even like the downtown area right now, we've got issues with parking, but yet we have a large parking lot now that's our mall. That's right at the intersection of 66 and 94. What if we kind of wrapped our head around providing a shuttle service from there downtown? It's an 8-minute ride. Allow people to park there instead of downtown. It can relieve some of the congestion downtown, cheaper costs, things like that. Putting that into our planning would be important. Any questions? Kathleen, or do you want me to go to Chris? You're going to defer to Chris? Okay. Chris.
I have 4.
4 questions, all right.
I'll try to be quick. BC Rides 2.0, is there a natural partner?
No, I think that's gonna.
So we'll have to develop that.
Unless transit wants to kind of get really creative with what they're doing and some out-of-the-box thinking.
And what would it take to get those federal tax incentives? Is that?
It's not that hard. It's just a matter of applying for them.
And they exist? It's kind of a no, it's an is it an
We hope that
easy
they're
thing
gonna
to
continue
do?
to exist, given the budget forecasts and things.
Okay.
With our current administration.
On the unpaid fines and fees, if I remember correctly, and I could just be making this up, haven't communities and maybe even our own community had like a couple of days a year where you can come and get fines waived because we're trying to help people out, and we just let that go? And is that a county level strategy, and is that a realistic opportunity?
You've got to have willing judges and willing, for instance, the friend of the court has done some things with that.
Yeah.
But there's still a court order and you've still got to pay something typically.
But so potentially, we as a steering committee could say this would be a big benefit for our community and maybe our county, and even think
Yes.
bigger than that and say, could we create that and could we help support some of that? Okay. Final question is around the community garage. Is the Career Center at capacity with theirs, and could that be leveraged as a greater asset and opportunity, or do we know on that?
I think it could definitely be a way to allow some of those individuals to go out and do some on-the-job training opportunities, right?
Yeah.
Gain some experience, provide some guidance. But I
I'm
think we need
thinking,
to take it into a neighborhood setting versus trying to get people to get all the way out to the tech center.
well, my thought is I see the Career Center like building houses in community
sure.
now. So could we build a greater community garage and maybe expand that resource? Is
I
just
like
a
that
thought.
even better, Chris.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I read an article a couple years ago about it actually increases employment to have personal vehicles as opposed to the bus. Do we know what that return is? I know you said 1 to 4 for the bus, or can we find out what that return would be?
Some of the research out there talked about how by expanding the circle of job search, by having your own personal vehicle, you're able to certainly compete for higher wage jobs and things like that. I wasn't able to find anything that had computed the actual ROI for it. But it makes sense, and I think this focused on kind of gaps that are available. We know that, for instance, the Wheels to Work program run by Goodwill exists. But how we could, and I think that's a part of the overall kind of continuum. This really needs to be, BC Rides 2.0 is not a fully encompassed solution for this. It's one piece of kind of a continuum of moving people from that initial issues and barriers that they have to full-time sustainability in their financial home.
What's the status of driver improvement fees out of the state, and are we making any progress there? Because I'm sure that they really hit, minority communities a lot more proportionally than other communities, and it's really a policy without an equity lens, if you ask me.
They've stopped charging new fines or fees around driver's responsibility issues, except in like your driving while intoxicated. Those kind of things are still there, but for driving without car insurance, for instance, that was one that would you pay $500 twice, and they'd zap you 2 years in a row on that.
Yeah, but didn't I read somewhere there's like $1 billion in fees that are out there that people owe the state, so they're driving around with suspended licenses until they get paid? So I think that would be a small impediment to people getting a personal vehicle.
The legislature allowed was some community service to offset some of those. It just hasn't been utilized as much. But
Part of the plan, wouldn't we want to educate our community as to what some of these potential alternatives are so that they can get a clean driver's license?
Yeah, we wouldn't want the repeat customer, right? I mean, we want to, and that was something that even came up in some of the focus groups out at the Burma Center. There was individuals that very quickly rushing to get their own vehicle, and then they're saying, wow, insurance is expensive, and then I got in an accident and it didn't even cover anything. Well, in talking with them, they didn't have a credit history, they had insurance before they went into the pool, they got PLPD to get that cost as low as they could, thinking that they're covered because they're not understanding the way insurance works, and then still being left on the hook, and then they're saying, well, I'm better off, why even have it? So having discussions about educating people before they make those purchases are important.
Okay, so in the essence of time, we do need to move on. If steering committee members have additional questions, they can get them to the BC Vision core team, and then we can get them to Scott and get them answered. Okay? All right. You bet.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, next, I get to introduce Karen Cooper-Boyer to talk about some steering committee follow-up items.
Good afternoon. My
actually here to replace John Bryant, and I tried to practice my Australian accent, and it didn't go too good, so you have to suffer with me. I'm going to, in the essence of time, I am going to skip through some of the slides as they are in your materials. And if you could look at slide 4, for those who have packets. I wanted to connect you to the last presentation we made on May 25th. In that presentation, we said that we would continue to work on the GED testing, the language barrier, as well as technical training. In addition, we said that we wanted to meet with leaders from the minority communities, and we were able to connect with the African American community leaders, VOSIS, Kellogg Community College, Center for Diversity, as well as the Burma Center. First, let's talk about the GED activity. So we had a committee meeting July 25th, and at that meeting we had very good attendance, and we learned a lot. What we learned is that there are really many different reasons folk seek the GED. Many take it because of a need. I am seeking employment, and therefore a GED is required. I need a GED to satisfy a court requirement. A GED want, I am seeking higher education, it's necessary to have a GED, or I'd like financial aid and for a higher education and a GED is required. The other thing we've learned is that the actual activity around the GED support services is very fragmented. So there's really no one-stop service to go and find all the information you need. So who does tutoring and testing? How does a person know where to start? What if a person has a language barrier? So we learned that it's very disjointed. We also learned that employers are not really educated on the GED process. Employers do not recognize their own education needs versus what the new GED requirements are. And employers are unaware of the GED alternatives to meet their educational requirements in place of the GED. So, looking at what our potential solutions are, we have a very strong committee working now that's already formed. Our next meeting is going to be on August the 29th, next week. We'd like to move the GED from the current underperforming ideal status for the community. Some potential solutions would be to create a whole value stream, a centralized community intake process. We'd also like to expand the GED testing to multiple locations based on the community needs. So right now, there is one test site at KCC, but obviously not all of our community members could get there, so we'd like to offer that someplace else. For the employers, we'd like to create a white paper so we can give them a high-level overview of the GED current process and the requirements. We're hoping with BCU we could reach out to the employers and educate them about that process, and then also seek to create a trial of the AccuPlacer. That would be an alternative to the GED test, and secure an employer to trial that with us. So here is our GED meeting participants if you're interested. So you'll see at the very bottom of that list, next time we're inviting funders to that meeting as well, although I'm not sure we know what to ask the funders for, so that may take some time, but we will include them in our meetings. The next area is the language barrier project we've been looking at, and when John presented last time, he shared with you that 8.8% of the Battle Creek residents speak a language other than English. We do know that ESL is offered in a few different locations. However, there are gaps. The levels that are taught are not clearly communicated, whether it be basic, intermediate, or advanced. And again, there's still no clear resource guide, so if you are a new citizen or new resident, you don't have a one-stop shopping where you can go and look and find out how to get to those resources. We also know there's challenges for funding for class, teachers, and space. So those are some of the things that we'd like to work on. And thanks with the good partnership that we have already beginning with KCC, we've identified 3 different areas that we'd like to work on. The first is ESL for the workforce. And KCC's Workforce Solutions Department would like to research best practices with regard to ESL curriculum for specific industries, starting with manufacturing. Then we would develop a pilot and run that ESL program for a company in the industrial park, using community parties such as BOCES and the Burma Center. Once the model has demonstrated effectiveness, what we'd like to do is include other companies, such as healthcare, because we know that that's another industry that has the same kind of needs. The second area we'd like to work with on the language barrier is ESL for the KCC student. So we believe there's two paths we need to look at. One path being for students of the ESL, and the other for being for English-speaking students. So the ability to raise their English level up so they can participate in the classes. And then the third area is ESL for the community. First of all, because we don't want to reduce, or we want to reduce duplication and establish a need. So research will be done to identify the existing ESL efforts in the community. And if there's a need for KCC to develop and offer community ESL course, we would do that with other agencies so that we make sure that we're not replicating those efforts. Moving on to technical training, there are three key parties that need to be actively engaged to reach success with this initiative, that being schools, technical centers and colleges, the employers, as well as potential students, parents, and employees. And our direction is to align the educators with the end users, so employees, and clearly communicate the opportunities to potential employees or students for talent success. I'm happy to report that we have a really strong committee established. They have created a mission. The mission is to inform, train, recruit, and sustain the community through employment opportunities. The direction of the committee is to create intentional awareness and a communication with the schools, colleges, employers, students, and we say the parents as well. Sometimes to reach the students, you have to get through the parents. We've already had some quick wins with our team. First of all, we're going to have a very robust manufacturing day. This is for high school seniors to come out, and they will also have 2 plant tours. 2 companies have agreed to do that. We've had radio interviews talking about manufacturing and what the great opportunities are. And this one I think is a really cool win. We actually secured a technical teacher from the employer group to teach at CVSD. So through the committee sitting there together, they were talking about a shortage of not having enough technical trainers. And afterwards, they found out that there was a person who was interested, and so now they have a new technical trainer. Our future planned activities are we would like to create an informative promotional marketing video that would showcase our plants, our products, and our people. We want folks to know that manufacturing is not scary. It's actually a clean environment. We also are going to be involved in Michigan My Career Quest Day. That's a huge event that will be held in Kalamazoo. And then we're talking about parent, student, and plant dinner visits. So we believe if we can get the parents to come out with their students and by providing coupons or a dinner, that will encourage them. So maybe then, who knows, we might get an employer out of the parent as well. And our long-term goal is we want to do intentional career progression activities. So get the student into high school training at RMTC, get them employed by an employer who offers tuition reimbursement, and then they would have lifelong learning skills opportunities so they could have an intentional career path. Next, you can see who the technical training committee is. It consists of employers, schools, colleges, economic development experts, Michigan Works, as well as Goodwill. We have had 2 meetings already, very well-attended meetings. Our third one is scheduled for September the 12th, and it's the second Tuesday of every month. So if you have an interest to come, please feel free to. It's not a closed meeting. Looking at racial equity, this is a new activity that we engaged in since our last meeting. What we know is that there are many groups working individually, not necessarily with momentum to make a large impact through consolidated activity. And in talking with Mike Finney, he said he felt the same thing when he did interviews in the community. But we did meet with the following organizations, BOCES, the Urban League, the Burma Center, as well as KCC. And what we understand is that the diversity organizations are working to meet the needs of their clients but they may not have all the solutions available or know-how or where to get them if there are gaps that are still needed to be fulfilled. The diversity organizations are really not completely aware of the employer needs, so there's not really any ongoing dialogue. So looking at what our direction is, we have a goal to create empowerment through cooperation and mutual respect within the workforce. We'd like to see these diversity team services and activities maybe mapped into one common community resource guide. And then our team would like to explore an opportunity to pilot a subcommittee for diversity from the Battle Creek HR Council that's already meeting. So there's a strong HR group meeting out in Fort Custer. It's not just for Fort Custer employees. So if there's other HR folks that want to come, they're more than welcome to join us. So to create some of these equity opportunities, we want to educate our local businesses through the Battle Creek HR Council. So we've arranged the following. Our very own famous Jorge is going to come and do diversity training for the HR group. He'll be speaking September the 28th. We're delighted to have you. October the 26th, we have BOSIS coming to make a presentation, as well as the Burma Center. So an opportunity for them to come out. And then there are two other activities I'll mention that we'd like to have come and present to the HR group. One is the Ban the Box. That's the removal of, if you've ever had a felony, we'd like to talk about that on our application process. And the other opportunity we'd like to do is talk about the HR group and how do we connect with the whole Ebonics language and making sure that there's a connection and a discussion with them on that as well. Our next steps, or what we'd like to work on, our GED. We'd like to transition the YMCA's GED test equipment to a new location, hopefully by October. We want to continue the monthly GED Action Committee meetings. Again, the next meeting will be August the 29th, and that will include funders. We'd like to identify an organization to lead this work moving forward, hopefully by October. And the goal would be to improve the offerings, our communication, as well as the outcomes. In the area of ESL, which we heard today through many of the group's discussion, especially on transportation, a big need, we want to create a cross-functional team and identify organization to lead this as well, moving forward by October. We hope our friends at KCC will lead that. But we want to focus on opportunities, communication, and employment. And then the technical training, we want to continue ongoing technical training council meetings. That next meeting is September the 12th. We'd like to identify an organization to also lead this work moving forward, hopefully by October. And again, the goal there is pipeline, building the pipeline, communication to the employers about the technical training that exists, as well as leveling up the skill level of potential employees, as well as our current employees, so they can stay employed and have a long-term career progression. With regard to racial equity, we want to create and keep racial equity in our lens when working on the above activities and through the HR group meetings that are currently being led by the BCU activity. And I know I went fast, but I think I'm out of time, and I know everybody's hungry, so I'll just go to questions.
Can you clarify, Karen, what is CVSD?
Oh,
under technical training?
Calhoun Vocational District, something.
Okay. I'm wondering, is that do you think it's the CACC, the Career Center that they're talking about? Or the ISD?
CVSD when they came and spoke to us.
Okay.
Don't they have a new acronym?
CISD? Might be CISD. Okay, just, I want to make sure I knew what organization.
Thank you. I will clarify and make sure. Yes.
So a couple questions. Well, just one question and a thought. So last week at the joint meeting of the Task Force of College and Career Readiness and Workforce, a lot of things that were discussed aligned to a lot of the strategies you talked about here. So I guess I have a general question. Do we have alignment and engagement, you know, Ben and Kathleen, with that? And if there is, then cool, question answered. On the HR Council, how many employers are in that, the Battle Creek HR Council?
We have had, well, because it's, you know, I hate to say the same thing, it's summer. So anywhere from 28 to 22 companies attend. But I mean, it's open. The goal is to get every HR person from every company in this whole region to come to it.
But so we have quite a few and probably a number of key ones, so we're saturated fairly well if we get messages to them and create alignment.
Yes. Like today, Bridget would attest to that. We had so much information to share with them. You know, you could see people taking notes. I need to know about the Career Quest activity. I need to know about Michigan Manufacturing. I need to know about the interview day. So we're sharing tons of information with them. They're a good group to get information to, I believe. You're welcome. And we're going to invite the Transportation Committee is presented to them, as well as the kindergarten readiness, and we're going to invite them back as well, just because we want to keep them informed. And I think they're a good group to know that kind of information, in my opinion.
Questions for Karen? Thank you very much.
Karen, are you looping in the temporary employment agencies at all in some of your meetings with the HR people?
Your question is good. It came up today about how do we do that and at what point we do that. So to tell you that we have done that yet, we have not. But can we do it and should we do it? Probably.
At the right time.
At the right time.
At this time, are there any questions from the audience? One question.
Is there any update on daycare activities?
Daycare activities.
Thank you. So tell me a little bit more about that question.
Wow. I could spend hours on that question. So one of the things that we've heard from obviously a large employer group, a lot of the employers, is the problem with daycare and not having enough available, and in particular for second and third shift.
So during the fall time, we're going to be doing a count day for families to see where children are in childcare and what childcare is available. So we see how many slots are available. In doing this, we're not going to solve your problem, not your problem, but the problem that you just identified. But it's going to give us a better, clearer picture of what is available. There are continued conversations in kindergarten readiness and throughout the community about this barrier in our community for second and third shift care. And so there is not a solution that I can tell you we have at the time, but we are taking a very close look at what the problem looks like. And many people have said we need to open up a center for second and third shift childcare. Well, then what has happened is some of our centers have expanded their hours and no families took advantage of it. And so really in solving the problem, we need to take a look at the needs and wants of families and make the solution more geared toward their desires for where their children are in getting them to work at second and third shift.
I'd like to add a little more if I can, Susan. Son? Okay. We're also working with the Small Business Action Team on helping to create home-based childcare centers. Also working with Generation E to help build some of those business plans, because what we know is that when we can professionalize childcare, most people on second and third shift want their kids in a home. They don't want them in a center. So what we need to do is increase the number of slots that we have in home-based care. That means we need to support people to open those businesses up and see them as a viable source of income. And so, Susan, you just had, there was an alarming, you looked at the data about the number of home slots we have right now, and we're at a record low. So we do know that there is a gap here, whether or not we can't quantify it specifically, but we do have to start by building this bridge to helping people understand that this is an option, what it would take to do that. We've been invited to submit a United Way Innovation Grant that might be able to support some of those startup costs that might be a barrier for people to start home-based
childcare. So there are some things that are happening that will help. The other challenge in these centers is they don't have enough staff now. I mean, the preschool classes can tell you they cannot find workers. Childcare centers can't find workers. So we've got to help. It is not a very attractive field to go into as it relates to pay. There's very few with benefits. So opening up additional slots or additional centers isn't as simple as just doing that because you actually have to find the staff. And the ones that we have right now don't even have enough staff. So this is a really complex issue.
But one thing that I'd like to go back to is last year with BC Pulse, BC Vision, and the Rotary Group, we did a study with Denso. And one of the things that came out of the study is that with the group that we worked with, the methodology that we used, it did not seem for the fort at that time that there was a compelling need for additional capacity. I would like to revisit with you and maybe take another look at that study with your larger group and see if this occurs as some way we can quantify what the need is, and then we can come up with different strategies and solutions around those needs. But there wasn't a compelling argument at that time that there was a need at the fort. So that was kind of the summary of what we found out.
And I think the reason we found that out is because we used one employee.
Exactly.
And so, in all fairness to the rest of the...
No, and I agree with that, but then as we were looking at different strategies as it related to Battle Creek, and we wanted to be more focused on it changed from an economic development study to more of a child care capacity issue, which was different. But we should circle back and take another look at, if you have this group that's meeting, to take another look at it.
I also think that we need to make sure that we're including the temporary service employers in that discussion, because those are the families that end up at the temp service and continue there because of the fact that, you know, they don't have childcare, so they lose their job and then they're back in the same place.
Diane, as part of Mike Penny's study, he mentioned a survey of childcare. Is that in his report?
I'm not sure. There were childcare recommendations in the Mike Penny report. Yeah, no. I mean, I don't. They didn't connect with a lot of the early childhood stakeholders in doing that. They did a lot of internet searches, so there wasn't really anything that came out of that was due to anybody. It's been working on.
Any other questions, follow-ups?
Good. Thanks, Ellie. All right, so a couple quick thoughts in closing. First of all, if you want a new tablet, it's simple. Put on your lanyard, hashtag BC Vision, comment on Facebook. By the end of the month, we're picking 2 winners. So that's kind of cool. That should excite you, but hold your applause, because you're a rowdy group. Second thing I just highlight, we continue to encourage action team participation. I think we're continuing some good traction within the action team. So both from a steering committee and in general, looking for greater participation. That's always an open opportunity. And I just remind folks that the next steering committee is scheduled for November 16th from 3 to 6. I'm going to keep it simple there unless anybody else has other things to add. Kara.
Just inviting everybody downtown for a free festival, Backyard Burgers and Brews Fest this weekend on Saturday at Festival Market Square. 3 live bands, burgers, fun, cornhole tournament. If you haven't registered your team yet, you might want to do that. Limited on that. And I know the military had 4 names that they were 4 teams they were submitting this afternoon. So kick a little butt there. But anyways, free festival this weekend.
From the committee? Thank you very much. Have a good evening.